Today we are going to look at number properties and be able to apply some of these number properties. So number properties are ones that always hold true. So for instance, we have this associative property, and what it says is that we can regroup numbers and still get the same answer as long as we're just doing addition or multiplication. So the way they came up with this word is that association means a group. And so the associative property is the grouping property. So what you're looking for are grouping symbols. And you're looking for them being in different locations. So for instance, if I had 3 plus 2 plus 1, and if I group the 2 and the 1, that's the same thing as saying 3 plus 2 plus 1 and grouping the 3 and the 2. So you're looking for parentheses being around different numbers, or maybe adding parentheses to a problem. So the commutative property is the moving property. So you're looking for terms moving spaces. And so again, it works with multiplication or addition. And when we move terms, let's try a multiplication problem this time. 3 times 2 is the same as 2 times 3. See, I can move the 3 on the other side of the 2 and still multiply and get the same exact answer. The identity property is one in which we get the same number. So there's two of them. There's either one for multiplication or one for addition. So for instance, if we multiply a number by 1, we always get that same number, and that's the identity property. We use this quite often when we are adding fractions. We want to come up with an equivalent denominator, and so we use this property, this identity property of multiplication. It also works with addition, but it's a different number. See, if you add 0 to a number, you always get that same exact number. The distributive property is when you multiply over addition or subtraction. So for instance, if I had 3 on the outside and maybe like we'll go with a 2 plus 4 inside. See, if I multiplied, instead of adding first, I could multiply the 3 over the 2 and the 3 over the 4, and then add and get the same answer. So you see how 3 times 2 plus 3 times 4 will give me the same answer I get if I added first then multiplied. See, if I add first, I get 6. 6 times 3 gives me 18. Here, I multiplied the 3 over the 2, and I get 6. 3 over the 4, I get 12, and I still get 18. So the two numbers agree. So that's the distributive property. So what we're trying to do on this first set of directions is complete each equation, come up with the same answer as I have over here. So 23 plus what equals 23, and what property would that be? Well, 23 plus 0 equals 23. And so what property allows us to add 0 to a number and not change the value? Well, it's this identity property. And so what we'll say is the identity property of addition. So looking at the next one, it looks like we have some numbers inside the parentheses here, 19 plus 6. But then on this side, they have 7 times 19 and 7 times 6. So notice that they're multiplying 7 by the 19 and 7 by the 6. So that's this property here, the distributive property. See how I took the 3 on the outside and I multiplied it over that addition, 3 times 2, 3 times 4. So that means there's a 7 on the outside of the parenthesis, just as there was a 3 on the outside on this last one. So that is the distributive property. Well, looking at our next problem, 27 plus 45 equals, and then they put the 27 on the other side of the addition sign. So that means that we have 45 on this side. So 27 plus 45 equals 45 plus 27. And so those two expressions are equivalent, and what allows me to switch the order is the commutative property. So we'll say the commutative property of addition. Well, looking at our next one, we've got the 6 outside, and inside we have a missing number times by 7. Over here we have 6, 14, and 7. So what's different is the parentheses. Notice that the parentheses were around this unknown number here in the 7. Well, that unknown number is 14. So would they move the parentheses from the 14 and the 7 to the 6 and the 14? So that is the associative property of multiplication. Well, looking at our next set of directions, it asks us to simplify the expressions, but we need to justify each step. So justify means that we need to use number properties. So these number properties that we were talking about earlier, we're talking about the associative, the commutative, identity distributive, that's what we need to use in order to simplify this. So what I'm looking at first is as I look at the 40, the 7, and the 5, can we reorder things, or should we just leave it in the way it is? What makes it easy to multiply? So as I look at this problem, 40 times by 7 and then times by 5, there might be an easier way to maneuver these numbers around. Let's do this. Let's take this 5 and bring it over next to the 40. So I want to do 40 times by 5 and then times by 7. So I used the commutative property. And the commutative property allows me to move that 5 next to the 40. And the reason why I did that is because 40 times by 5 gives me a number that's easy to deal with. And we'll see that in just a moment. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure I multiply the 40 and the 5. So I'm going to put some parentheses around that 40 times by 5 and then multiply by 7. And that's using the associative property. And now I'm going to go ahead and multiply that 40 and 5. You see, when I do that, 4 times 5 makes 20, and then I just bring down that 0, so I get 200. And see, that's an easy number to deal with. And so all I did there is just multiply. And then I can go ahead and multiply the 2 by the 7, and I get 14. And then I just bring down these two zeros. And so I end up with 1400, and that is my answer. So it's not just the answer I'm looking for, it's also using the properties. See, if I had multiplied the 4 by the 7, that gives me 28. And carry down the 0, it should be 280. 5 times 280 is tougher than 200 times 7. So that's the whole key, is to make numbers with 0 at the end. And we use this whenever we're trying to add or multiply numbers that are larger together. Sometimes this makes it easier. I'm going to do the same thing on this one. I'm using that commutative property again, because I see if I bring the 15 and the 85 next to each other, and then the 98, I end up with an easier addition problem, a number that comes with a 0 at the end. And so that was the commutative property. So I use that commutative property, and then now I'm going to use that associative property again. I'm grouping the 15 and the 85 because I want to make sure I add those numbers together first, because again, that's going to give me a 0 at the end of the number. And so I add those numbers together. 5 and 5 make 10, carry a 1. 1 and 8 make 9, plus 1 makes 10. See, that makes 100. And 100 plus 98, well, I can add those together pretty quick, and I get 198. Well, the next problem asks us to use the distributive property. And this is used when we're trying to multiply larger numbers without having to think, oh, I'm supposed to do 7 times 3 and then carry the 2, and then 7 times 4 and then carry, and then add the 2 to that product. Here we can do it a little bit easier, so let's try this. So it goes this way, 7, and then in parentheses, let's take 40 and break that down to 40 plus 3. And you see what makes this easier is it's just single-digit multiplication. 7 times 4 is 28, and bring down a 0, and then 7 times 3 is 21. Now, let me go ahead and show that step in between this. So I'm going to go ahead and show that step of how I got the 280. So I'm going to go ahead and write down 7 times by 40, and then I'll go ahead and multiply those in the next step, and then 7 times by 3. So I'm multiplying 7 by 40, and see, that makes 280, and I got that by 7 times 4 makes 28, and add a 0, and then 7 times 3 makes 21. And then I can just add those two numbers together, and I get 301. So on this next one, though, it's a little bit different because the number is closer to 600, so I'm having to round up. And so I'm going to change this to 600 minus 3. That's what 597 equals. And then times by 4. So I'm going to multiply the 4 over that subtraction this time. So 4 times by 600, and then minus 4 times by 3. And so the parentheses next to the number mean that I'm multiplying. So now I go ahead and multiply. 4 times 6 makes 24, and then carry down the 2 zeros, and then minus 12. And you see this subtraction is a little bit easier than having to try to figure out 4 times 597 in your head. And so 12 from that number gives me 2388. So 2,388 is our answer. Well, those are the types of problems you'll see on tonight's homework. Good luck.